Hello there, folks. It's almost midnight, and I got behind because of our computer problem. I got behind. I didn't get a chance to answer all of the responses to part 12, where I did my best to show you the primary and secondary on a transformer, how to figure out the wires. That's what that was all about. So I'm kind of lazy and tired tonight. I just got home from work a little while ago. I think I'll go ahead and catch up on my responses this way and start out this part 14 by answering the responses. Old M Coates 50. And he says he enjoys the video. He has an old Spartan 930 he'd like to save. It's from 1929. And it's all apart. He's starting from scratch. So the first thing tested was the transformer, which vibrates. What causes that? Piece of cake, guy. Just go to Google and type in vibrating transformer. You'll learn all about it. I appreciate your response, though, on that. And then we have Kalkaki. I think that's their Kalkaki. I think he says, good job. Thanks, sir. Appreciate that. Tom GB says, thanks, you showed me just what I needed to know so I could check out my transformer. From now on, when I hear the word center tap, I'll know what they're talking about. Well, actually, center tap means get the beer keg out. Let me see here. Mr. Harvey Luke. Good job, John. I learned all this in the 60s. But review is always good. You cover the practical, and Rick McWhorter covers the theory. You know, just having me in the same sentence with Rick McWhorter is a real honor. Rick is just... They just don't get any sharper than Rick, and you're right. He covers the theory excellently. And let me see a little further down here. We've got Wolf Hog. Says, thanks, John. Great explanation. Charlie. You're very welcome, Charlie. And then we've got Laredo Stan. Thanks, John. It made perfect sense. Boy, that's a lot of credit, I'll tell you, because it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Thanks a lot. Great tube information. Tubes outlast the radios. That's exactly right. And this was given to me by Chair User 4. And it's kind of he's making a comment here that every time someone tube radio breaks, they say, "Yeah, it must be a tube, bad tube." You know, among the vintage radio repair world, it's kind of a joke among us. You know, yeah, it must be a bad tube. When I repaired that Zenith, we just finished the Zenith just before the 630. I'll never forget when my son handed that thing off to me. He looked at me, he says, I don't know, Dad, you know, it doesn't play or anything. John, my friend who owns the radio, you know, he said it might be a tube or something. Of course, I busted out laughing. You know, you hear that all the time. You go to a flea market, an auction, anywhere, and, you know, they got this tube radio there, and they say, well, it doesn't play. It probably needs a tube or something. And then we got David J.B., I guess is what it is. David Corrington, Tennessee. He says, thanks for your time. He's loving it. 73s. Well, 73 to you too, my friend. So that's it. That catches me up on part 12. I'll try to stay caught up. I've been pretty busy here lately at both work and continuing on with the 630B restoration. I'll also be doing a YouTube video here very shortly that has nothing to do with vintage radios. I think you'll like it. Well, we've got the shells pretty well stripped, looking really good. So now it's time to go ahead and JB weld in some bolts in here, small screws, I guess is what they are, machine screws, or I don't know what they're really called. But they're going to sit down in these recesses, as I said in, I think, the last video. I've already taken my knife and scratched around real good on each one of these. Really made a lot of scratchy marks, so it'll give the JB weld I've got over here something to grab hold of. So all I'm going to do is lay a little bit of, mix up the epoxy, or the JB weld first. Then I'm going to lay a little bit of it down here and a little bit of it there. I'm not going to cover the entire circle. You know, just a little bit here and a little bit there. Just enough to hold the bolt head in place after I drop it down in there. It'll be nice and flush. Incidentally, one more time, whenever you mix epoxy, JB Weld, or any 2-part or even 3-part compound together, always mix from the outside toward the center. Always from the outside toward the center. On this JB Weld, I had it takes equal amounts of each, the hardener and the steel, from the outside in. Alright, I'll take a little bit of this on the end of my knife blade and just kind of stick it down in there a little bit on one side. Go back and pick up a little bit more, twist it around, make sure I don't have any strings hanging off of it, and just kind of lay it down in there on the other side. Not too much, doesn't take a whole lot. Then it's just a matter of taking the screw, dropping it down in there and pressing. That's all there are of it. I've already got this hole done also. Alright, that's all she wrote. Just like that. Nice and flush. Now I'll just spin it around, do the same thing to the other end. A Dremel tool, one of the indispensable little items you need for working on vintage radios. They come in handy for so many things. I now have a cutting wheel at the end of it. By the way, Christmas is coming up, guys. You know, you need a Dremel tool? Good Christmas present. I've got a cutting wheel in it, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to whack out top and bottom across those sets of holes. So let's get started. And that's it, all done. I use this file right here, hand file, to shape the hole a little bit better, and some 800 grit sandpaper to smooth the edges so they wouldn't cut into the wire. That is looking real nice, almost perfect. Alright, we got the bolts cemented in, the hole has been cut. Now I'll do a dry fit to see if the wires are going to go through without a whole lot of stress on them. Well, the dry fit's going okay, but I can't get the lid or the clamshell completely on, because on the right hand side there where the wires are up against the metal, I've marked it with a pencil. You can see the black line. I'm going to have to cut that out a little bit further. Give myself a little more room. Well, as you can see, I'm going to have to cut it. I've already done some cutting. I'm going to have to widen this hole a little bit more. I do not know how they got all those fat wires through those small 2 holes that were in there. But anyway, the insulation right now is so brittle that I have to give it plenty of room. So I'm going to go ahead and round it out and cut out this little strip next. Well, there it is, back together. The only problem I'm going to have now is the end of the stud of that screw that goes all the way through is sticking down a little bit too far, a little bit too close to those wires for my blood. So I'm going to go ahead and take my motor tool and cut that stub off up close to the nut. That way I'll have plenty of clearance and I don't have to worry about it for the future, because these wires do lift up a little ways once the transformer is placed in the chassis. Now that we know they fit good, I'm going to go ahead and prime the inside and then spray the inside with clear enamel over the top of the primer. That's all I'm going to do. I'm using some darker Rust-Oleum automotive primer. Let's get that done, and then after that dries real good, we'll flip it over, prime the outside, and then paint the outside with black enamel gloss. You don't have to waste a whole lot of time spraying the inside, because it's all going to be, the only reason I'm doing this is to keep the corrosion down a little bit. I don't want any rust to develop, or at least not develop very soon on the inside. Let's see how that works. Let's let that dry. And now for a little clear coat, just to keep the primer down. Not a whole lot, just enough to prevent corrosion. The next thing to do is kind of hit the edges with some primer on all 4 sides of this thing, just along the edges a little bit, as close as you can get without painting everything. And where the clamshell edge fits down over the laminated portion of the transformer, I'd like to get a little bit of primer up under there. I don't want to just leave it plain. So we're kind of, kind of get an angle over here where all we get is like just the edge. Just the edge a little bit. You'll wind up getting more everywhere else, but you know, at least it'll have some primer underneath the lip of those clamshells. Everything has now been sprayed and dried. It's a good idea not to paint the outside of the clamshells prior to putting them back on the transformer. In the process of putting them back on, you can scratch the paint, dig the paint with your fingernails or whatever, because these things don't fit really loosely. You know, they go on there very tight actually. So don't take a chance. That's why I painted this in advance. So now we'll go ahead and stick it back on, put the screws on that hold the two clamshells together, and go ahead and spray it. It is time to make this bad boy look pretty. So let's get started with the primer. Oh my gosh, looking better already. Look at there. Woo-hoo! We have a nice looking transformer on this radio. Again, take your time. If you take your time, you have very good results. Well, there it is after the first coat has dried. Now what I'm going to do is let this thing set overnight. The thing you have to understand about paint, for those of you who don't do a lot of painting or spray painting, the paint may be dry, but it's not hard. And sometimes you'll paint something and then it'll rest on a surface, and the area you just painted, it'll feel dry, but when you pick it up, it's got impressions in the paint from where it sat on the surface. And you're like, well, the paint was dry. Yes, it was, but it wasn't hard. That's what makes the difference. Give your paint time to harden up.